Tonight, Kamala Harris praises Joe Biden's big heart as she tries to unite her Democrat Party. The path towards the current Vice President standing to be the next President of the United States is opening up as she's backed by potential rivals. Back here, the government goes on the attack over the now scrapped Rwanda scheme, revealing the previous Conservative government spent £700 million on it. Also tonight, the new Education Minister, Baroness Jacqui Smith, tells me universities need to be as efficient as possible and doesn't rule out closures. Plus, right now, MPs are debating last week's King's speech, but will we see a rebellion over the two-child benefit cap? We'll have the latest as Conservative leadership hopeful Suella Braverman announces she wants it scrapped. Plus, after a historic weekend in the US, we'll look back at some other recent leaders who've promised to stay on and fight, and then, well, didn't. Sticking with us tonight, Jonathan Ashworth and Richard Tice, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Politics right now in the US is moving at breathtaking pace. It was only yesterday that Joe Biden, just months before Americans vote on who should be the next president, announced he was withdrawing from the race. Since then, donations have surged, we've had hot takes from just about everybody, and Kamala Harris has given what's essentially the first speech of her campaign. "Together, we're going to win this," she tweeted, before addressing a crowd outside the White House and paying tribute to Joe Biden. It's all felt incredibly fast. And I say that as a survivor of the time here in the UK when we had 3 prime ministers in just 2 months. Well, on the programme today, we'll be discussing what comes next after President Biden's departure from the race. And we'll be assessing the chances of Kamala Harris, his choice to be the Democrats' candidate. But the speed of it all has got me thinking, because it didn't need to be this rushed. You know, the public have known for a long time that something was not right with President Biden and his bid for another 4 years in the White House. The polling shows that. You know, the public felt it way before politicians acknowledged it. And if I'm quite honest, before parts of the media started facing up to it as well and being honest about it too. It was in May last year that a poll showed more than 6 in 10 Americans said President Biden didn't have the mental sharpness or the physical health to serve effectively as president. Well, first tonight, then, let's cross to Sky's David Blevins, who's in Washington for us. David, it's been an extraordinary 24 hours or so, but tonight it appears a path to the nomination is opening up for Kamala Harris.
Yes, Sophie, I think we are looking at a coronation which may be described as a contest because the Democrats will not want to give any ground to Republicans, to give them any space to suggest that Kamala Harris has not won the backing of the Democratic Party. But how would they not put her on the ticket now when she has the endorsement of President Biden, the endorsement of former President Bill Clinton, and within the last hour, the endorsement of a very highly influential Democrat, the former Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Others who at one stage would have been considered rivals to substitute Joe Biden on the ticket have also rallied behind Kamala Harris. And while she's been very careful today at a scheduled event on the South Lawn of the White House addressing student athletes, conscious that there has to be clear blue water between her role as Vice President and her role as potential candidate in the election for the Democrats, she didn't formally launch her campaign. That would have been deemed inappropriate, but she did take the opportunity. She did use the platform to pay tribute to the man who has decided he will not be in the race for the White House.
Joe Biden's legacy of accomplishment over the past 3 years is unmatched in modern history. In one term, he has already, yes, you may clap. In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office.
And David, you know, we've had such an extraordinary couple of weeks in the US with the story, of course, surrounding Joe Biden, but also, of course, that shooting attempt on Donald Trump as well. And we had an apology today.
Yes, a remarkable 8 days in the politics of the United States. It's hard to believe, Sophie, it's just 8 days since the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Many of his followers putting his survival down to divine intervention. But on Capitol Hill, congressmen and women from both sides of the aisle believe the miracle is the fact that the director of the Secret Service is still in her job. They subpoenaed her to appear. They told her that if she didn't resign, they felt that the president should sack her because they felt he was at threat, Donald Trump was at risk, and others the Secret Service are tasked with protecting also have their lives on the line. She was holding firm against questions like how did the 20-year-old gunman access the rooftop just 150 metres from his intended target? Why, if there was an identified threat, was he not removed, and why was Donald Trump allowed to take to the stage? And ultimately, the big question from many on the hearing committee today, did the Secret Service decline a request from Donald Trump's campaign to strengthen his security detail in the wake of a threat against him directly from Iran? She didn't get drawn on too much detail. That caused great frustration from those who were asking the questions. One of them told her it was totally unacceptable that this investigation was going to take 60 days to complete. And another one used rather colourful language, swearing at the lack of detail, the vagueness. So she's in her job for now, but given the bipartisan pressure on the director, then I think it's going to be very difficult to see her surviving. Nonetheless, she has taken some responsibility, and while praising the Secret Service detail who were with Donald Trump, she's recognised to some extent that the buck stops with her.
The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed. As a director of the United States Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse of our agency. We are fully cooperating with ongoing investigations. We must learn what happened, and I will move heaven and earth to ensure that an incident like July 13th does not happen again.
So the politics of the United States is never dull. We're juggling two different things at the moment: an investigation into the attempted murder of a former president and presidential candidate, and the rumblings within the Democratic Party about how and when they might replace Joe Biden formally on the ticket with his Vice President Kamala Harris.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins reporting there for us from Washington. Well, Joe Biden's decision to quit has thrown the US election wide open. While many world leaders have spoken positively about the president's time in office, they've been a bit more guarded with their thoughts on his potential successor and the next US leader. Keir Starmer says he will work with whoever the American people elect, but who that is will, of course, affect things here and around the world. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi reports.
It was the surprise everyone was expecting, but Joe Biden's seismic revelation comes at a time when the world is in crisis, from the Middle East to Ukraine. America's allies have been sympathetic to his decision.
His presidency will leave a legacy that extends far beyond America to freedom and security on this continent.
Joe Biden will be in power for the next 6 months, and as the Democrats scramble to get behind Kamala Harris, he'll be dogged by accusations he's a lame duck president. But it may be that he can instead focus on the big issues of the day. He could put more energy into calming the situation in the Middle East. President Biden will be aware of his legacy. Prime Minister Netanyahu, on his way to the US to address Congress, has a difficult path to tread. He knows it's now not so easy to predict who the next president will be, and his words will be carefully calibrated.
Regardless who the American people choose as their next president, Israel remains America's indispensable and strong ally in the Middle East.
America's enemies in the region may sense weakness, and groups like the Houthis and Hezbollah may try to capitalize, causing more instability on one of the world's fault lines. And in Ukraine, future US commitments, if Trump wins in November with his America First policy, is also far from clear. Likely nominee Kamala Harris has met with President Zelensky in the past, and if she makes history Biden's policy of full-throated support will almost certainly continue. In Moscow, where enmity with Washington is at Cold War levels, the reaction's been cautious.
At the moment, we cannot judge Ms. Harris's potential candidacy from the point of view of our relations with the US, because we so far haven't heard any kind of input from her regarding bilateral ties.
The US election will have an enormous influence on global events, but at the moment, there's great uncertainty. How the next few months pan out, and who succeeds America's retiring 46th president, will be watched and scrutinized extremely closely. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
Now, JD Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, the man who wants to be vice president, is speaking now in Ohio. Let's listen.
I.O. Now, I got to be careful about that because Michigan is one of the most important battleground states. So I cannot give the state of Michigan any reason to vote against the Trump-Vance ticket. We got to work hard for every single vote. But look, my point in telling some of these stories is just that I love every one of you, and I love this town, and I'm so grateful to have been formed by it because I wouldn't be who I was without it. And people will sometimes say, well, you had a tough life. And in some ways, things weren't always easy, but a lot of you will know, a lot of you read my book, my life wasn't all that different from a lot of people who grew up in Middletown, Ohio. It was tough, but it was surrounded by loving people, and it was surrounded by something that if we don't fight is not gonna be around for the next generation of kids, and that's opportunity. Middletown had opportunity, and we gotta make sure it's there for the next generation. You know, when President Trump asked me to be his running mate, I really had no idea what was coming. What happened is I left my home in Cincinnati, so we live not too far from here, about a 35-minute drive, 45 minutes depending on traffic, and we went to Milwaukee on Monday morning, and I had no idea. I thought maybe he was going to ask me, but I thought I might ask somebody else. There were a lot of good guys running. Marco Rubio, a dear friend of mine, really great public servant, a number of other folks as well. So I had no idea what was coming. And when the president called me and asked me, he said, would you like to run as my vice presidential running mate? I said, well, yeah, of course, right? We didn't come all this way to say no. But he did something that was really amazing afterwards. He said, well, what do you think about this statement I'm about to put out? Of course, he put it out on social media. It's one of the things I love about President Trump is that he speaks directly to people. He doesn't allow a bunch of consultants to filter him. He is who he is, and that's why a lot of us love him. But he's talking about this statement.
Now, my colleague Yalda Hakeem is in Washington for us. Yalda, it's been an absolute roller coaster for you in the United States. What's your assessment of the race so far? Is it effectively going to be a coronation, do you think?
Well, at this stage, Sophie, it feels like a stampede, an avalanche towards Kamala Harris. I mean, when you think about it, 24 hours ago, Joe Biden was the presidential nominee, the president of the United States who contracted COVID less than a week ago. Then suddenly, in what was shocking but not surprising, suddenly announced he was stepping down. And then, of course, big questions were being asked. Who would potentially replace him? Would this open things up to many others who would come out and perhaps stand in? But with 3.5 months left till the presidential election, the Democratic Party decided they needed to get organized. They needed to rally behind one person, and that one person seems to be Kamala Harris. Don't forget, Sophie, we're about a month away from the DNC, and I was at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee last week. There was a sense that Donald Trump's campaign had been galvanized. We are now just over a week since that assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, and he came in as this former president that was strengthened. And, there were calls that almost like there was divine intervention, and that's why he had made it, that he hadn't been killed. I was told by delegates there that there were people who wanted that event, that RNC, to be Donald Trump's funeral. Instead, they were moving towards a win. This has thrown everything into a level of disarray. I'm speaking to people here in DC, Sophie, who are saying to me that this is the wildest election period in modern living memory. And it does feel like some kind of movie. You couldn't script some of this stuff. I mean, if you told people that there would be an assassination attempt on Donald Trump and that there would be pressure on Joe Biden to step down and that the RNC would re-galvanize Donald Trump's campaign and then Joe Biden would step down and Kamala Harris would step in for him, you'd think that was too much for 1 week, but that is exactly what's happening in US politics right now.
Yeah, it's extraordinary when you lay it all out like that. I should say, you know, we're obviously speaking as JD Vance is also giving a speech in Ohio. Just talk to me a little bit about the man who wants to be the next vice president. How do you think he's going to go about it?
Well, I'm speaking to, Republicans that are part of the establishment, and they very much feel like J.D. Vance's nomination is a nail in the coffin of the Republican Party that we once knew. You know, if it was someone who was part of the establishment like Marco Rubio, it would be a very different campaign. But J.D. Vance, 39-year-old, who very much has come out of nowhere. He's been in politics for about 18 months, and he's this young, charismatic man from the Midwest who is married to a South Asian woman, an Indian American woman. His children are mixed race, but he comes from the Midwest, and it is certain states in the Midwest, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which are key to this election. It will come down to those three states. So the statements that you're hearing him say tonight and talking about the working class Americans, the white working class Americans that Donald Trump has really tapped into, that is part of the MAGA base who feel left behind. And that was their grievance back in 2016 when Donald Trump won the first round, became president of the United States when he was up against Hillary Clinton. That is really the message they're pushing today. And J.D. Vance has become the face of that. When he spoke at the RNC, he was speaking directly to the Midwest. And you could feel that in the room. You could feel the room energized. And those from those swing states really felt represented through J.D. Vance. And he is going to continue to push that message. But Sophie, this is also going to get quite messy and vicious. The Trump campaign, you'll remember in 2016, really went after Hillary Clinton for being a woman. They went after some of those issues that were at the heart of the Hillary Clinton campaign. No doubt they're going to target Kamala Harris, if she is the nominee, and it is looking that way, for her race, for her gender, for the way she laughs, for example, the way she dresses. All of these things they have targeted before in campaign ads, and we're going to see that happen again. So it is going to be critical to see who she chooses as her VP and whether she goes with someone like the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, for example, who is very popular in the state of Pennsylvania, whether she looks at candidates like that as part of her running mate and part of the ticket to try and also tap into the kinds of voters that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are now pushing for.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Yalda Hakeem there, speaking to us from Washington. And of course, Yalda will have more on the US election. She's presenting the world live from Washington tonight, and you can watch that from 9 o'clock. Here on Sky News The World with Yalda Hakeem at 9. Right, let's bring in our duo for tonight, shall we? The Chief Executive of Labour Together, Jonathan Ashworth, and the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Good to have you both on the programme today. Jonathan, to you first. Do you think that Joe Biden did the right thing from stepping down?
Yes. I mean, it was inevitable, wasn't it? We could all see it had to happen. We all knew it was probably definitely going to happen, particularly in recent weeks when we saw people like George Clooney, very influential figure in the Democrats. I mean, he's obviously a big Hollywood superstar, but is still known as a big Democrat. We were reading in the papers recently that Barack Obama was making his views known. It was inevitable. It's interesting now. I do think the race is upended. If you'd have asked me a week ago when Joe Biden was still in the race, I would have been saying Trump's got it. I think it's slightly more open now. We'll see what the polling says. I expect soon we'll get the new numbers out and we'll see where we are in the race. Makes it a very, very exciting race. But, as Keir Starmer said today, he's a Prime Minister leading a government and he will obviously want to work with whoever becomes elected US President because our relationship with the United States is so important.
Do you agree with that then, that the race is a bit more unpredictable now that...
Well, I mean, isn't a week a long time in politics?
Yeah, it's
extraordinary what has happened. I've been saying for months and months and months that Joe Biden would not be on the ticket. And I think for the reasons that are self-evident, it was inevitable. As Jonathan has rightly said, I always thought it would be you'd end up with some form of coronation, and that's where we are. And it looks as though Kamala Harris is going to be the beneficiary of that coronation. But I think, actually, I differ. I think that very quickly the polls will essentially diverge even more. And
what? So you think that Joe Biden would have had a better chance of beating Donald Trump?
I think that Trump was heading towards victory regardless. But I just don't. There's a reason why Kamala Harris, in recent years, has had a very little sort of exposure. I just don't think that she will prove to be up to it, however much the Democratic base try to support her, which obviously they will. So my hunch is that the polls will divide, but as Jonathan rightly says, the UK government, whoever it is, will deal constructively and positively with whoever's elected president. But I think that Trump will essentially move away, and I think it's a very interesting choice of vice president.
Well, obviously Donald Trump is an extraordinary figure. But I do think now that, Joe Biden's been forced out of the race because of questions around his ability and his age. I don't think Donald Trump wants a debate about age now. That becomes a problem for Donald Trump as well, because he's no spring chicken either. A bit younger than Joe Biden, but you don't know where he will be in 4 years.
A great deal healthier.
Well, you say that, though. He's a big lad. So you don't know. I'll probably get people having a go at me on Twitter for that comment now. But, the point I'm making, he doesn't necessarily want a debate about age. It suited him when all the focus was on Joe Biden. Do people start asking questions about him now?
But it's also interesting, why is there no real competition for this opening that suddenly...
Well, that's because they've hardly got
created?
any time, right?
Well, no, I think actually it's different. I think that the competition have made the calculation that this is all over, and basically it's a done deal. Trump wins. So rather than essentially sort of blight their prospects, they're now looking 4 to 5 years down the track. The other main contenders, the Newsoms of this world, the Pete Buttigieg and others. So I think they've made that calculation and they're saying, Kamala, you lose this, and then that opens...
Why do you not rate her so much?
I just think that if you just look at her ability to interact with the media, to take questions, there's a reason why she hasn't been used when Biden's been struggling in a significant way, and that's because I just don't think that she is as good as...
But we don't know why that is, do we?
Well,
it could be because Joe Biden didn't let it.
But we've all seen Joe Biden struggle over the last 12 to 18 months, and I think it's been accelerating. And a strong, competent VP would have been used ever more, in a sense, to sort of to cover up the frailties that we were seeing in Joe Biden. And what will be interesting is also how much we see of Joe Biden between here and January.
What I did think was interesting in the package was that, rightly being pointed out, that J.D. Vance is on the ticket to try and win these Midwestern swing states. If Kamala Harris puts on it, presumably it will be her as the nominee. And it feels like it's a done deal, but, politics is very much a roller coaster at the moment. Who she puts on the ticket and whether she goes for this governor of Pennsylvania and whether that makes it competitive, because you've got two VP figures there fighting for the same states in the Midwest.
It's going to be a fascinating race for sure. Thanks both very much indeed. Now, let's go back to the UK, shall we? Because the Prime Minister has set out plans to boost the training for British workers who, he says, have been let down by a lack of opportunity and a fragmented, broken system. Keir Starmer hopes this will wean the country off what he described as an over-reliance on overseas labour. So, in other words, if firms can employ better-trained Brits, they'll be less likely to look abroad. So what is the new body, Skills England? And most importantly, is it going to work? Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been investigating.
3 weeks in and out of Labour's comfort zone. A Prime Minister at an arms fair.
Hi, I'm getting a chance to wish you all my level.
Alongside the military establishment, pushing British kit and telling business he wants to end the dependence on foreign migration with a plan to boost skills.
Skills England will work with the Migration Advisory Committee. We will identify current and future skills gaps. put in place plans to address those gaps and reduce our long-term reliance on overseas workers.
You're saying this morning that you want to improve skills training to get British jobs for British workers effectively, but isn't it pay, not skills, that's going to make the difference?
We shouldn't have as high a level of migration as we do simply because we haven't got a skills strategy that works. That's not common sense and we need to change it. An element of that will be about pay, of course.
Challenges that haven't been fixed because of the reliance on overseas labour.
In the early 2000s, we saw some absolutely fantastic technicians that came into the UK from Europe. They were brilliant, well qualified, very competent, but what that did was throw a blanket over the problems that we actually had at home. We realised that there was a skills gap. This has not been listened to by the previous government.
Keir Starmer and his ministers haven't been shy, telling us just how central tackling migration is to their agenda. He's gone far further than his last Labour predecessor, Gordon Brown, would ever have dared. But will all these task forces and agreements and training programmes really make a difference to a global problem? Or is the Labour Party better off just blaming their predecessors?
Yvette Cooper.
The new Home Secretary singling out the Rwanda scheme as a costly failure.
It has already cost the British taxpayer £700 million. Most shocking of all, the previous government had planned to spend over £10 billion of taxpayers' money on the scheme. They did not tell Parliament that.
We will, of course, work with...
The election's over, but some things don't change.
At a particular point, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, old habits die hard.
That a slip, but one other habit Labour intends to continue, casting every tough choice as the fault of the Tories. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, Sam joins us now. Good to have you here, Sam. So you've been following Keir Starmer around today.
That's right. Starting, interestingly, before we get onto the subject of the day, migration, at an arms fair. Right, that's what the Farnborough Air Show is. And I would just gently note that not every single predecessor as Labour leader would have been quite so comfortable, but he looked completely at home, fresh from NATO, talking about the importance of Britain's military. He isn't afraid to do things that some Labour folk are squeamish about, and that includes tackling or talking about migration. Whether he manages to tackle it is another question. But we saw this from two ends today, the illegal, and he was dealing with his plans for legal migration. Now, I think it's quite interesting, the gap between what he chooses to talk about in order to tackle the problem and what he doesn't. Because on the table today, as you heard, there is a new skills plan. He's going to sort of tweak and change the skills plan to better equip, he would say, Britons to do the jobs that currently often go to overseas workers. Whether that works, well, we'll probably never find out. Pay is just as big a factor in these circumstances as well. And also, he very deliberately isn't abandoning some of the changes that the Tories introduced towards the back end of their time in power in order to, for instance, curb the dependence of students from being able to come to the UK. So there are things he's choosing not to talk about that might make a bigger difference to the numbers. When it comes to illegal migration, well, he scrapped the Rwanda scheme and Yvette Cooper was trashing it in the Commons and pointing out the cost. Let's see whether or not his plans for the new agency and deals and agreements really makes a big difference. It might be that just this plan of attacking the opposition, now the Tory party, is the best thing that will get through to the public.
Yeah, it does feel there's going to be, a slight period of grace on that. And then, of course, we're going to get the numbers, aren't we? Whether it's the growth numbers, whether it's the migration numbers, and that, I guess, will be the real test.
Next week, probably Tuesday, Rachel Reeves will front a big moment in Parliament where they say, here are the reasons why things are much worse than we said during the election campaign, which probably rolls the pitch for some tax rises in the autumn budget.
Interesting stuff. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there with a bit of a prediction for us, what could be coming in the months ahead. Thank you. Well, we were talking there with Sam about Skills England. I also spoke to the Education Minister, Baroness Jacqui Smith, about that in an interview a little time ago before we came on air. Let's have a listen. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Nice to have you here, no longer as a panellist, but as a political...
in the hot seat, Sophie.
In the hot seat, yeah, exactly. And you're here to talk about Skills England. What's the idea?
Well,
obviously, a very important theme of the election campaign was how we can grow the economy. That's a central mission of the government, as is, of course, how we can ensure that people are overcoming barriers to opportunity. They're getting the opportunities, particularly from my perspective, to learn, to gain new skills throughout their lives. In order to be able to do that, we've got to do better on skills than we've done up until this point. We've got about a third of vacancies now where employers can't get people to work because they just haven't got the skills necessary in order to fill those vacancies. So unless we can bring together that skills infrastructure better than has been the case previously, we'll carry on having those gaps. And that's the task that we're setting for Skills England.
It's also been seen as part of a strategy to, I guess, kind of improve the skills of British workers so that firms don't need to rely on migration. Is that fair?
No, that is fair. And one of the key partners for Skills England will be the Migration Advisory Council, along with employers, along with thinking about the industrial strategy. Because if we're going to build more houses, if we're going to tackle climate change through new industries around new forms of energy, for example, if you haven't got the skilled workers to do that, then previously employers' only choice was to look overseas, which of course added to migration. But actually we want those opportunities to be available for people in the UK, young people and older people, because that's good for them, but it's also good for growing the economy as well.
I guess I'm kind of trying to unpick this framing slightly, because it seems to me that there isn't, much evidence to suggest that actually there is a real link between the skills of the British workforce and higher immigration. We haven't got evidence to show a similar rise in unemployment, for example, for British workers when we did see higher levels of migration, because we have a flexible economy, so it's not like we've got a fixed number of jobs in the labour market.
No, but we do have evidence that we're not growing quickly enough because we're not able to find the skills to fill those jobs. As I said earlier, a third of vacancies.
But you wouldn't see this as necessarily something that's going to bring down levels of immigration?
Well, I think what's important about migration has played a really important role in this country, culturally and socially, also economically. But nevertheless, we have not got enough skills within the country to get the sort of growth that we've set as a government as a central mission. And also, we've got people who want to fill those roles and yet haven't been able to access the sort of skills training. Employers haven't been able to find the courses that would enable them to do that. So, of course, this is about making sure there's coordination across the system, but it's largely about how you grow the economy and how you provide opportunities for individuals as well.
Now, your ministerial role is looking at further and higher education as well. Today, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, said that universities need to kind of manage their own budgets rather than looking to the taxpayer. What do you think she meant by that?
Well, what she meant was what she said, which is, of course, it's no surprise that one of the first things that I learned when I came into the department is that universities are under quite significant financial pressure. The last government knew about that. They just chose not to take action. So But of course, they are also independent, autonomous organisations. So we are seeing universities beginning to make changes to become efficient, as they should do.
What kind of changes should they be making?
Well, that's one of the things that I'm really keen, and I was talking to some vice-chancellors just this morning, that's one of the things I'm really keen to work with universities to understand so that we can support the efficiency that universities need to show whilst also protecting the students' interests within that.
So basically, rather than looking for a bailout, they should first be looking at, job cuts or cutting back on certain courses, for example.
They should certainly be looking at how they can run as efficiently as possible. And later on this week, we're also going to be saying more about the regulatory system for universities through the Office for Students, who have already identified this financial challenge. But I think we can do more to set the direction through regulation of what we expect universities to be doing, because they need to do that also whilst they maintain access for people to university. Because just as people get opportunities through skills training, so they get opportunities from going to university, both of those things grow our economy, which is absolutely fundamental to what we're trying to do as a government.
Are you realistic to the threat that some universities might have to shut?
Well, I don't want that to happen, and I'm concerned that students are still able to get those opportunities, and we will work with the universities in order to give them the sort of long-term future
But
that I'm afraid
might happen,
that I'm
you think?
afraid the last government didn't put into operation. You know, this is another of the things that we are finding that we've been left with as the government ran away to an early election.
But you acknowledge it might happen, right?
I hope it doesn't happen, and you know that's what we need to work to try to avoid. It's first of all in the hands of universities to take the action necessary in order to be as efficient as possible. But I want to work alongside them in order to make sure that our higher education sector, which is internationally recognised, it's one of the key enablers in this country for individuals and for the economy. I want that to work successfully, and I'm willing to work in partnership to ensure that that happens.
Just want to talk about a couple of things just off your brief, if you may. This is what it's like now on the chair. The green agenda, because it does feel like this is a government that wants to, you know, build, even if that means reviewing the green belt, even if that means, for example, changing environmental protections around kind of nutrients, for example. There's also speculation about the runway at Heathrow. Right now, is growth trumping green?
Well, growth is one of the ways, of course, that you achieve green, actually. So, you know, as I was saying earlier on, one of the big growth areas that we're going to have in the industrial strategy is more renewable energy, using technology to help to solve some of those climate problems. So it's not, you know, I don't think it's a lose-lose. I think there's a win-win here. But we do need to grow. We need to find houses for people. We need the infrastructure to support our growth. And as a government, we've said, and we've already taken action on planning changes, for example, we do need to ensure that that happens. And we will be very willing to engage with how that happens, but there cannot be an if, because the country and our future prosperity depends on us being able to grow.
So growth first, everything else, you know, you might have to wait a bit longer for. Not everything.
No. What I said, Sophie, was it wasn't a one or the other. I said there's a lot of synergies between them.
One thing that we might have to wait for, though, is the removal of that benefit cap, the two-child benefit cap. Lots of debate around that, lots of people unhappy about it. What's your own view on it?
Well, what you won't have to wait for is action that this government is taking on child poverty. You know, Bridget Phillipson, my boss, and Liz Kendall at the Department of Work and Pensions already getting together to work on that much more wide-ranging strategy to get children out of poverty.
I'm asking specifically about that cap.
Yeah, which I think the Chancellor was very clear about yesterday, will cost £3 billion. We have very clearly said that we're not going to make promises or do things that are going to plunge the economy back into the sort of mess that we've inherited, that we're now having to clear up. But child poverty is at the heart of a Labour government, and that's why, in a whole range of ways, reforming housing, bringing in breakfast clubs.
Look, I know, I get it. I know
so you know we are
those are lines that we're getting, you know, from the government. We get it.
Sorry, Sophie, they're not lines. They are things that we are already doing as a government.
But I'm specifically asking about the two-child cap.
Yeah.
Rosie Duffield, fellow Labour MP, says it's like something out The Handmaid's Tale. What's your own view on it?
Well, look, I think if it's going to cost us £3 billion and we don't know where the money's coming from, we're not going to be making promises that we can't deliver. We know what happened under the last government when people did that, and it was the families that most couldn't afford it who suffered from that chaos. So we will undoubtedly make progress on child poverty, but we'll do it in a way that doesn't trash the economy and recognises the whole range of different ways that we need to support families.
Now, the last time you were on this programme, you were in the panel chair, as we said at the beginning of the interview. You've now been appointed as a minister, I think, 25 years after your first job, also in the Department for Education. How's it feel being back?
Oh, it's brilliant to be back there. I mean, I am so, you know, I talk a lot about lifelong learning in this job, and now I've got a sort of opportunity for a bit of lifelong learning and a new chance to be part of government. It's a massive honour, and, you know, I know it means that I'm going from commentator to being on the pitch, facing tackles from people like you, Sophie. But I am massively proud to be doing it.
I always think with these things as well, you know, if you remember the Shadow Cabinet, you kind of know the call's going to come, you're kind of primed, you're waiting in Westminster. Did it catch you by unaware?
Well, it did a bit. Even though I'd sort of had a tip-off a bit in advance that it might be coming, I was at my caravan in Wales and managed to miss the first two calls. So I've got to get back in the habit of being sort of on the ball when it comes to reshuffles. But luckily, they didn't scrub me off the list, which was my slight worry, and the Prime Minister did call, and I was enormously honoured to say yes.
I love it. Once you picked up the phone to him.
Once I got off the beach in Wales. In fact, I took the call on the beach in Wales.
I love it. That's great. A lovely bit of detail. Thank you very much. It's great to have you on the programme. Thank you. Jacqui Smith there. I love that image of her taking the call or missing the first call. Oh, no! but she's had a few words I can't say on TV after missing that call.
Yeah.
Right, let's bring back in Jonathan and Richard, shall we? We were talking there primarily about the kind of Skills England thing, and obviously it's part of the strategy from Keir Starmer and the new government that if they upskill British workers, then they'll be less of a reliance on overseas labour. Do you think that's a good strategy?
It's as though he's actually been reading and copying many of the speeches that some of us have been giving for years, to be honest. And it's the sort of right words. The question is whether that's turned into action. I've been saying for years there are far too many people going to university, far too few apprenticeships. The responsibility actually is on British firms to employ and train up and skill up British workers. That's why we talked about an overseas immigration tax. You've got to incentivise British firms.
But you like what you're hearing from him today, then?
It's easy to talk the talk, and in a sense, we've been saying very similar words.
OK, we've got that.
He turns it into action. That's the key.
So we got that you were there first.
Well, he's been listening to reform.
But come on, do you welcome it then? Do you like what you're hearing?
I do welcome it, but I want to see delivery, not just warm words and waffle. That's what we've had for far too long from the previous government.
There you go. What's your take on the sort of skills agenda? How important do you think it is?
Well, first of all, it's a good, sensible Labour agenda to give working people the skills that they need to get on in life, to get a good, well-paid job, and this is what Labour governments should be doing. I think our lack of labour supply in the UK is one of the things that's been holding back economic growth. So one of the things I'm keen to hear is, yes, we need a skills policy and we need to bring together, have a unified skills strategy, not this fragmented landscape that we've had for too long across England. But we also need a welfare reform agenda as well, because we've got increasing numbers of people out of work for reasons of long-term sickness, increasing numbers of young people not in education, employment or training. This is one of the real failures, a real Tory legacy of failure that they've bequeathed to the Labour government. And I want to see a welfare reform agenda to go side by side with a skills agenda. Liz Kendall's talking about putting better skills support into job centres. That's a really good, important start. But I think we can go much further on a welfare reform agenda. It's the sort of thing I was talking about when I was the Shadow Working Pensions Secretary, when I was making speeches at the Centre for Social Justice. I know it's something Keir is committed to and Liz Kendall is committed to.
What do you make on the two-child cap?
Well, I mean, I was on record saying it is a vicious policy. Actually, Lord Freud, the welfare reform minister under the Conservatives, is on record saying it is a vicious policy. But, as Jacqui Smith rightly said there, and Rachel Reeves has rightly said, the price tag attached to it is over £3 billion. And that's not small change down the back of a sofa. And Labour fought on a manifesto where it said every spending commitment we make will be fully costed. We cannot just pluck £3 billion out of thin air. But obviously, we've got a child poverty strategy being put in place. That's going to be really, really important. And I'm sure these things will be looked at.
But actually, there's a link between the welfare reform that Jonathan's been talking about. You've got to motivate work. You've got to make work pay. That's actually why you've got to lift the income tax starting point, so that actually people can see, yes, you can afford to have more children with a growing economy and if people are in work and it pays to work. And there are too many people trapped at the moment on that calculation. Do I work 16 hours a week? Does it pay to go and work 40 hours a week? We have to change that calculation urgently. I think that's a serious responsibility and opportunity on this income.
Well, you're right, Richard, but it's expensive because that's about the way in which, this gets really technical, about the way in which the universal credit rate tapers away. Now, if you want to give people more universal credit for working beyond 16 hours, which is a perfectly legitimate policy objective, there is a cost to it.
There is, and we said the quickest way to deal with that is to lift the starting point to 20,000 as opposed to 12,500, and we cost it. So there's serious things that have got to be done here.
Can I ask you quickly about what she was saying about universities as well? Because my ears did prick up then. I thought it was quite interesting. She was saying, look, you know, yes, some universities might struggle, some might even go bust, but there's not going to be money from the taxpayer. They've got to make efficiencies themselves.
Quite right, and bluntly, tough. I mean, I've been writing about universities for 7 years now, saying that there are too many universities offering, frankly, not good enough degrees that take way too long. You need many more two-year courses. Our students are leaving with the average student debt that's the highest in the world, or equal highest. And so, yeah, I think they've got to have some serious efficiencies. And bluntly, there are too many people coming out of university with way too much debt who would be much better off, frankly, going into work, apprenticeships, skills and things straight after college.
Well, I mean, I disagree with you a little bit. I think it's important that working class kids get the chance to go to university. It transformed my life as a working class lad from a dad who was a croupier and a mum was a Playboy bunny girl, would you believe I ended up in? But going to university transformed my life. And I think it's important that opportunity is there for working class children. I also think our higher education sector is a great export to the world, and we should be immensely proud that we've got some of the best universities in the world, Cambridge, Imperial, LSE, etc., in this country. But there is a problem with university financing at the moment. And I know this from my old constituency. I've gone the other direction to Jacqui. I've gone from MP to commentator now.
Switched seats as well.
We've switched seats. But I do know the pressures they are under. But people from across the world want to come and study at UK
But how can they be under
universities.
pressures if actually it's a great export and they're charging many more to international students? Maybe they're just badly managed.
OK, we're out of time, but a really interesting debate. Thank you very much indeed. Well, university fees and, of course, the migration debate sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian. That's Harry Cole and Pippa Creer. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Sir Keir Starmer says there's no silver bullet to end child poverty as the government faces growing pressure to drop the two-child benefit cap. How much pressure is he under within his own party, though? We'll find out next. Hello, welcome back. Now, you might think that with an absolutely massive majority, Keir Starmer doesn't have to worry about pesky things like parliamentary rebellions. Well, that theory could be put to the test over the next 24 hours or so, because there is some pressure over Labour's decision to keep the two-child limit on benefits, at least for now. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins me now. And John, you are absolutely kind of haloed by a smattering of politicians. What's going on?
Well, these are the Labour rebels who want to force the government into a U-turn on that two-child benefit. Just a reminder, it was announced by George Osborne as Chancellor in 2015, just after the Tories had won that election. It was the budget when Ian Duncan Smith stood at the bar of the House and did that and went, fantastic. It came in 2017 and there's massive pressure. They're debating the economy in the Commons. This is the Commons order paper. There's actually 3 amendments calling for the scrapping of the two-child benefit cap. There's one from Independents and Greens. There's one from the SNP. But this is the one that's got the most names on it so far. It's proposed by Kim Johnson, and look at some. She's the Labour MP for Liverpool Riverside. Some of the stars, if you like, of the Labour left. The old warhorse John McDonnell there, regular on this programme. Ian Lavery there. Rebecca Long-Bailey, my little Becky, John McDonnell used to call her. Richard Bergen here. And over here, look, we've got Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn back with his old mates from the campaign group. This was Kim Johnson speaking a short time ago in the House of Commons as she put forward her amendment.
We need action. This punitive policy needs to be consigned to the dustbin of history where it belongs, and its place to lift 4 million children out of poverty. Let's put these children and our country first, and I call on the Chancellor to make some immediate changes.
Well, John, the thing is, I guess my question is, look, how much does Keir Starmer have to worry about this? Because he's got a huge majority.
Tony Blair never worried, did he, when the likes of John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn were always voting, because they had such a big majority, a similar size now. But it looks a bit embarrassing, doesn't it? 2 weeks in, if there's a big rebellion on such a big issue as this. What was really interesting during tonight's debate, we've had Rachel Reeves speaking, we've had Jeremy Hunt speaking. Behind the scenes, Liz Kendall, the DW Work and Pension Secretary, has been talking to Labour MPs, trying to reassure them. Remember last week the PM announced that task force with Liz Kendall and Bridget Phillipson to look into the whole issue of child benefit poverty. But what happened shortly before Kim Johnson spoke this evening, there was a real surprise intervention by Suella Braverman. Yes, Suella Braverman is backing these Labour rebels, left-wingers. Suella Braverman said in her speech, let's come together, scrap the cap and end child poverty for good. There were gasps during her speech for the thought of a right-wing Tory MP joining forces with this lot.
Yeah, I have to say, it's quite an interesting collection of characters, isn't it? John Craig, thank you very much indeed. John Craig, talking about the new rebels. These are the guys who could be trouble for Keir Starmer. Well, as we've been discussing this evening, we talk a lot about politics in the UK, but politics in the US is moving at a very quick pace, the wildest election ever, as predicted by some talking to Yada Hakeem. Joe Biden has left the race for a second term in the White House, but it came after repeated assurances he would be carrying on the fight. And he's not first, with a will to cling on until it really is, politically at least, all over.
I am a fighter and not a quitter. I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party.
I'm here, proud to be the First Minister of Wales, to serve and lead my country. That's what I've done today. It's what I'll carry on doing. I have this morning taken the difficult decision to begin the process of stepping down as the leader of Welsh Labour and, as a result, the First Minister.
Brits don't quit. We get involved, we take a lead. I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
So I confirm it is my intention to let my name go forward for the second ballot. Now it's time for a new chapter to open, and I wish John Major all the luck in the world.
I stand ready to finish the job. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
There's something about these exits, isn't there? I guess it's in politicians' natures, isn't it, to try and cling on until the bitter end. Do you think Joe Biden should have made a step down a little bit earlier?
I think he probably should have done. I think a lot of Democrats probably think he should have done as well. But he has done the right thing by going now.
He has, but I think it was orchestrated. I think it was deliberately designed to hold it as late as possible, to have a coronation rather than a messy, controversial battle between various contenders. And I think the real point is that if they thought they could win it, there would be other contenders emerging. They don't, and they haven't.
Do you think we do it a bit better in Britain? We're a bit more ruthless? I mean, there's been a pretty fast merry-go-round of leaders over here.
Well, the Tory party is ruthless. The Labour Party tends not to be very good at getting rid of leaders that he thinks are duds. On saying all that, I'm not remotely suggesting.
You put up with mediocrity for long. Is that what you're saying,
we've got an excellent leader at the moment who's given us a landslide victory, which is why, by the way, he won't be losing any sleep over that.
No, that's interesting.
The lefty Labour MPs voting against him.
Do you think he'll be quite pleased? Well, not pleased is probably the wrong word, but in some ways, do you think that it actually might help him? To show that he's taking on the left.
I think it will show that he what he said in the election campaign, that he's only going to deliver things that he can properly fund. I think it will show the British public that he's a man of his word. But also, look, John's getting very excited in John's typical way, and credit to him. I think, I love John Craig. I think he's fantastic. But when you've got a majority of whatever it is, this huge majority, no one's going to worry too much about, a handful of Labour MPs voting against him tomorrow night.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we've got mechanisms here to get rid of prime ministers they don't seem to have in the US, and it just feels to be a much more brutal, head-to-head parliamentary process.
Was it a bit brutal for you when Nigel Farage came and took your job?
No, I've been encouraging it for months and months. I was delighted. Absolutely the opposite. I'd been urging him to get us together. But actually, he was reluctant to because he
didn't seem that reluctant.
No, he was reluctant because actually one of the reasons he was reluctant was the security issue.
That is...
And regrettably, we saw it in the first week that he was back, and regrettably, we've seen it in the US. There are serious issues, and politicians, senior high-profile, have to be protected.
Can I ask you a quick question? I mean, it's obvious that...
We've got 30 seconds of
Nigel Farage coming back helped you.
If
If Rishi had gone in November, would Nigel Farage have come back, and would you be an MP now?
Yes, because we were going to... we were literally announcing it a week later. And one of the reasons he went early...
Go.
...was he went early because... Sunak went early because he'd heard that Farage was coming back.
Oh.
Right, we squeezed it in. That was very impressive. Thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the programme. That is it from us tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J and me. See you tomorrow.